call this battle the Fetterman Fight, the Fetterman Massacre, or the Battle of 100 in the Hands. Was this battle a cleverly planned and executed tactical victory for the American Indian, or a shocking defeat for the U.S. Army as a result of incompetent leadership, disobedience of orders, military ambition, or hubris? Hi, Wyoming Traveler here, and I'm at the site of the Fetterman Battle. It's a cool, windy day until the Battle of the Little Bighorn 10 years later. This site was the location of the greatest Indian victory in their fight against the U.S. Army. So what happened, and how did this battle come about? Historians' view of the Fetterman Battle, or as the Indians called it, the Battle of 100 in the Hand, has changed over the years. When I first read about this battle back into the 60s and before, the general consensus was that Fetterman was a hot-headed individual who disregarded orders and rode his troops into a massacre. Since then, historians have believed that it really wasn't Fetterman. It was another officer that led the troops into the ambush, and that Fetterman was coming to his rescue and did not realize the number of Indians that were hiding down into the gullies here at the site. So let's going to go on and look at the battlefield. In 1866, the U.S. government ordered Colonel Henry Carrington of the 18th U.S. Infantry to construct 3 forts along the Bozeman Trail to protect travelers heading to the Montana gold fields. The Bozeman Trail, however, went through prime Indian hunting territory. Once land of the Crow had been driven out by the Sioux about 10 years earlier. The land, known as the Powder River Country, was now controlled by the Sioux and their Arapaho and Cheyenne allies. These Indian bands refused to allow any whites in the land and were determined to fight to keep them out. The conflict from early summer to late winter was continuous between the soldiers, the white travelers, and the Indian warriors. Wagon trains, livestock, forage, and wood gathering parties were under constant attack. Around 20 soldiers and civilians had been killed since the midsummer of 1866. The stress of constant attacks and finding the mutilated bodies of victims led several officers to press Carrington to take offensive action against the Indians. While none of these officers had experience fighting Indians, most, except Carrington, were combat veterans of the Civil War, and many did not like or respect Carrington because of his lack of combat experience and cautious approach to the Indian situation. In November, the garrison was reinforced with the addition of 63 cavalrymen and several new officers, among them Captain William Fetterman. Captain Fetterman served throughout the Civil War, and was twice cited for gallant conduct. Fetterman planned a night ambush against the Indians, which failed, however. Later, Carrington, Fetterman, and other officers planned an offensive for the future. The opportunity came on December the 6th, 1866. The signal station reported an attack on the wood train. Fetterman would lead a detachment to relieve the wood train and pursue the withdrawing Indians. Carrington would lead another detachment to the north and cut off the retreating Indians. The difficult terrain, the soldiers' poor horsemanship, their inexperience, and their fear of the Indians, plus irresponsible or disobedience of two officers, one being Lieutenant Grumman, resulted in the plan's failure. The fight did, however, encourage Red Cloud and other Indian leaders. Red Cloud decided to conduct a larger operation against the troops at the fort. With a force of between 1,000 to 2,000, maybe even more warriors, he planned a trap north of Trail Lodge Ridge against the troops at the fort. Prior to attacking the troops, Red Cloud and other chiefs consulted the spirits. A medicine man, thought to have special powers, rode out alone, seeking a vision and collecting soldiers. 3 times he returned to the chiefs with his collection, and each time told that was not enough. On his 4th trip, he returned and told the chiefs he had collected 100 soldiers in his hand. In the minds of the chiefs, victory was now assured, and plans for the ambush were put into place. This episode is why the Indians referred to the battle as the Battle of 100 in the Hand. About 10 in the morning of December the 21st, the wood train was dispatched west of the fort. Less than an hour later, pickets on Pilot Hill signaled that the wood train was under attack. Colonel Carrington organized a relief force of 49 infantrymen and 27 cavalrymen. Captain Fetterman asked for and was granted command as the senior officer. Lieutenant Grumman was placed in command of the cavalry. Volunteering to join the relief party was the post quartermaster, Captain Brown, and 2 civilians, James Wheatley and Isaac Fisher. The total force was 81 officers and men. From this point on, what really happened and what was really said are steeped in controversy and debate. Did Captain Fetterman disobey orders or act impulsively, or was he just unlucky? I will attempt to answer the questions as objectively as possible. Colonel Carrington stated, and various contemporary sources support him, that he in effect told Captain Fetterman at the fort's gate not to cross over Lodge Trail Ridge, and he repeatedly told Lieutenant Grumman from the fort's walls to remain with Captain Fetterman and the infantry. After leaving the fort, Captain Fetterman turned his command northwest towards a group of harassing Indians, perhaps planning to attack the raiders from the north, pinning them between his troops and the wood train. About 12 o'clock, people at the fort heard continuous firing from the north. The gunfire lasted about 20 minutes, then silence. Since none of Fetterman's command survived the fight, what is known of the battle comes from three sources: Colonel Carrington's report and the observations of the soldiers who arrived shortly after the battle, eyewitness accounts of Indians recorded decades after the fight, and archaeological findings. Based on this information, it is possible to construct what may have occurred during the battle. Fetterman's command was last seen on the crest of Lodge Trail Ridge, deploying in skirmish order. From the ridge, they moved on to the Bozeman Road. The Bozeman Road ran along a narrow crest of what is now called Massacre Hill or Ridge. The sides of the hill are steep, and in 1866 had extensive growth of brush in the valley below, far more than what is there today. In the valley was hidden 1,000 to 2,000 Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Sioux warriors, the Sioux making up over half the Indian force. At some point after crossing the ridge, Lieutenant Grumman with the cavalry broke away from Captain Fetterman and the infantry, probably in an attempt to engage the decoys. The two groups were now widely separated. The troops moved along this ridge. The troops continued along this ridge, pursuing the Cheyenne Sioux decoys. As the cavalry moved down from the ridge into the valley of Pinot Creek, the decoys gave the signal, and the Indian warriors sprang to attack. When the attack began, the cavalry was a mile ahead of the infantry. The cavalry began a fighting retreat up the ridge. Wheatley and Fisher and a few of the cavalrymen dismounted and made a stand among some rocks on the northeast side of Massacre Hill. I want to comment about the weapons used in the battle. The two civilians, Wheatley and Fisher, were the best armed, with each having a 16-shot repeating Henry rifle. The cavalrymen were armed with Spencer single-shot carbines. The infantrymen had single-shot muzzle-loading muskets, which under ideal conditions could fire 3 rounds a minute. Few of the Indians had firearms. The majority were armed with bows and arrows. White Bull, in an interview about the battle, says he carried 40 arrows into the fight, but used only 20. According to him, there were so many arrows on the ground, a warrior could just pick them up. War clubs were used for close-in, hand-to-hand fighting. At this point, the pursuit has ended, the attack has begun, and the soldiers attempt to fight their way back up towards the ridge. And the wind is blowing, it's raining, and I am going to beat a hasty retreat back to my car. With the cavalry under attack, and Fetterman unable to see what was happening along the north end of the ridge or in the valley below, may have hurried the infantry to the sound of fighting, not realizing that his troops would be facing a force of maybe 2,000 warriors. The surviving cavalrymen fell back to this hill, now known as Cavalry Hill. However, they were quickly overrun. A few troopers, along with Captain Brown, made it to where Fetterman was forming a defensive perimeter in the rocks at the site of the present monument. American Horse's mnemonic illustrates this defense. If Fetterman was coming to the support of the cavalry, as evidence suggests, it was a futile attempt. Quickly, warriors at the south end of the ravine rushed up and cut off any hope of retreat to Lodge Trail Ridge. The fighting was bloody hand-to-hand affair. Among the several myths about the Fetterman fight is the story that Captains Fetterman and Brown shot each other to prevent their capture. The evidence does not support this story. American Horse claimed he rode into the group of soldiers and hit Fetterman with his war club and then cut his throat. The surgeon's autopsy reports no bullet wounds on Fetterman. Brown, however, could have shot himself, as he did have a gunshot wound to his head. The last personal story I want to tell is that of bugler Adolph Metzger. Following the battle, the Indian warriors mutilated the bodies of the soldiers in an horrific manner. According to some of the men recovering the bodies after the battle, and some Indian accounts, Metzger's body was not mutilated, but covered in a buffalo robe as a sign of respect and honor. He fought off his attackers using his bugle. A battered bugle in the Buffalo, Wyoming Museum is said to have been Metzger's. Shots were heard at the fort. Carrington ordered Captain Tenor Tenike to join Fetterman with a relief force. Tenike brought his force of soldiers and civilians to the hills south of the battle site. By this time, the shooting had ended. He reported seeing nothing but Indians in the area who were enticing him to come down and fight, which he declined. Tenike sent a message to the fort for more munitions and a cannon. The Indians, however, retreated, mistaking the approaching wagons for cannons. With the Indians gone, Tenike moved to the battlefield and recovered the stripped and mutilated bodies of Fetterman's command. That evening, 49 bodies were carried back to the fort. The remainder were recovered the next day. The night after the battle, the situation at the fort was desperate. Colonel Carrington asked for 2 men to take the news of the battle to the telegraph station and request reinforcements from Fort Laramie, 236 miles away. 2 men volunteered, John Portuguese Phillips and Daniel Dixon. Sleeping and hiding during the day, they rode through the freezing nights in the middle of a snowstorm. They made it to Fort Reno and alerted its garrison, and then rode on to Horseshoe Station, the nearest telegraph. They were uncertain the telegraph went through, however, so Phillips rode an additional 40 miles in a blizzard to Fort Laramie. At Fort Laramie, in classic Hollywood fashion, Phillips arrived to interrupt the Christmas dress ball with the news of the battle. For several days after the battle, the garrison at Fort Phil Kearny feared an Indian attack. A quarter of the fort's fighting men had died. Ammunition was low, and rifles were in poor condition. But an attack never came. The warriors had won their victory, and now was time to celebrate and honor the dead. Soon the great Indian camp broke up, and the various bands settled in for the winter. Reliable estimates of Indian casualties are difficult to calculate. Deaths from actual combat range from 11 to 60 warriors killed, with a possible 100 wounded dying a few days later. It is believed that between 60 to 300 warriors were wounded in the fight. Most historians agree, however, that the heavier Indian losses came as a result of friendly fire. Fort Phil Kearny and its sister forts would survive for another 18 months before being abandoned by the Army. In August 1867, Red Cloud would attempt to repeat the Battle of 100 in the Hand, but with far different results. That, however, is the subject of another video. The Fetterman Fight, or the Battle of 100 in the Hand, may be one of the least known and misunderstood battles in the history of the American West, filled with many myths and falsehoods. I hope this video has provided a better understanding and knowledge of this conflict.